This is the timeline of Metallica's guitar tuning. As you see, there's sort of dip in the middle. For about a decade, Metallica played lower than E, and then returned to it, but only in the studio. They keep playing half step down live. Which begs the question... What up? Hi friends, it's Andriy Vasilenko. As bands get older, they tend to play lower in order to spare the singer. But unlike others, Metallica tuned down, barely hitting their 30s, and tuned up again in their mid-40s. Sort of. Metallica's got sort of schizophrenia. In the studio and on the stage, it's two different bands. Among other things, they go E standard in the studio and E flat live. And so today we're going to find out what actually caused that tuning roller coaster of Metallica. And we can see at least 3 reasons why Metallica tuned down in the 90s. But to see the origins of that, we should go all the way back to the very beginning. James Hetfield became the Metallica singer because he had to. Oh God, no! But initially, it was the opposite. He wanted to just sing, while Dave Mustaine took all the guitar. But soon it turned out that 2 guitars brought more power. And so James began combining guitar and singing. Well, it was tricky, but he had to bear with it till they find their real singer. Metallica was gaining momentum very quickly, so it was ever so risky to take aboard just anyone to be the frontman, especially after the recent fiasco with Dave. But James still did not really like being the vocalist. He did not think of himself as a good one, plus it distracted from his real passion. Riffs. And James's natural shyness seemed incompatible with the role of the band's frontman. And so he reluctantly kept singing, while Metallica kept looking for the perfect guy to take the duty. And so went year after year. It's 1986 now, and still no perfect guy in the horizon. Meanwhile, James's skills improved, including singing and stage presence. By that point, he had sung on yet 3 albums and hundreds of shows. And so Metallica began thinking, well, maybe screw it and leave it as it is. The death of Cliff Burton may have ended all the doubts. The band needed a strong backbone to keep going, and James Hetfield became such. Well, James did not spare himself in the 80s. He yelled and screamed, kinda compensating for the lack of the vocal skills, compensating with the energy and the harshness. Just listening to Injustice for All can make your throat sore. It seemed like Hetfield got the iron chords. Turned out he didn't. Imagine being the frontman of the biggest metal band in the world, whose aiming get even bigger. You got the producer, you got the riffs, money, gear, hype, all in place to make history. And you lose the voice. You lose Metallica's 5th instrument, which at that point is too late to replace.
I did actually lose my voice on the Black album. I pushed it too hard.
Oh yeah! Oh yeah!
Luckily, they pulled it off. And the Black album, you know what it is. James took professional lessons.
And that's actually what got me into a maintenance program and taking a lesson.
And he began changing his singing style.
You know, I'd still sing like a sailor.
Most of the Black album still features his trademark harshness. But there were new colors unleashed that hinted, you better sing that way more, otherwise you can lose your voice again, perhaps forever. Also, there were 2 down-tuned songs on the Black album, which may have suggested another way of saving James's voice. The tour in support of the Black album ended in July 1993. 2 years, over 100 shows across the globe. So you can imagine how they were tired of the road, tired from playing the same shit over and over, tired from each other. That was definitely a huge strain on James's voice, especially considering that he recently lost it and then went on the craziest tour they ever had. And so, after the tour ended, Metallica went on a well-deserved vacation, which lasted almost a year. They briefly returned to the stage in the summer 1994, and the guitars were still tuned to E. Then, working on the new album began. They were busy, but they traditionally did an escape from the studio mini tour, giving only 5 concerts for the entire year.
We're going to tuck, fuck, suck, yuck.
And now, they were in E-flat. When the guys reunited after vacation, they brought new ideas with them. Kirk had time to jam with Lars, while James was still hunting deers. What an unheard violation of subordination in Metallica! James did not get pissed though. In fact, he found the stuff that Kirk came up with somewhat cool and fresh. Well, he must have rested really well.
No.
In 1994-1995, James and Lars pumped up several dozens of songs together. And those songs were not that tight as usually. They got bluesy riffs, they got simpler composition, no surgically precise double tracks, and they allowed Kirk to actually record rhythm. Say that to Metallica of 1986, they would go like, "Are you f***ing serious?" Except Kirk, he would probably say, "Yay." And by the way, in that period when Kirk was allowed more, he was really into blues, especially guys like Jimi Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and those guys played half step down, which went well with James's musical preferences, who too used lower tunings. And so Metallica had to go lower too, in order to easier to transcribe and play along those songs. And since musicians are lazy f***ers, why then tune up later? No one minded using more bends, slides, etc. And releasing the strings actually made the bends easier to play. Ersin suggested, for now, E-flat is the new Metallica tuning. But this is not the end of the story. There is another piece of the puzzle. A lot had happened between the 5th and 6th Metallica albums in those 5 years. And the Black Album may have foreseen or ignited the drastic change in heavy metal. Thrash was fading away. The majority of bands began altering their style in order to stay relevant. Luckily for Metallica, they were in such a place they could release anything, and that would be sold like hot pies. And that's what they basically did. By the 90s, metal began slowing down and blues made a comeback. Bands such as Alice in Chains, Pantera, they brought back some of the early Black Sabbath vibes, including going lower than E. In fact, many heavy bands downtuned before it became mainstream. And so in the mid-90s, it seemed the only way of getting heavier sound on the guitars. Even Megadeth went E-flat on Euthanasia 2 years prior to Load. Or 3, 2. And surprise! Metallica too listens to music. They too get influenced by other musicians. Again, Alice in Chains, Kais, Corrosion of Conformity. Those are not that bad inspiration, huh? Be glad it was not Oasis.
I don't believe that anybody smells quite like you do.
So there's definitely some trend following in the Metallica case too. World changed, music changed, Metallica changed too. They had been writing music for a decade and a half, and so they were genuinely curious how this new tuning would fit their songs. The previous couple attempts were successful, so why not make an entire album like that? Mind you, E-flat was still almost E. Nothing drastic happened, just like when companies make their products slightly smaller while keeping the old price. So why then did Metallica return to E standard eventually? Again, in the studio only, they go lower live, the reason being to ease James's singing. And now, as he gets older, James is training his voice like never before. They spend incomparably more time on the stage than in the studio. Especially by doing the old songs that are in higher demand and where his younger self did not spare his throat. And sometimes James's voice, even now, does fail.
I hate that I can't sing. I don't know if you've ever felt like you've done something your whole life and then all of a sudden you can't do it.
While in the studio, the tension is more controllable, recording goes line by line.
You terminate for me!
And they can stop and take a breath whenever they need it.
Yeah.
And so, because of that, Metallica may view going to E standard again with extra effort within the walls of the studio.
Standard tuning, classic. And I believe that it gives James's voice a certain angst and a certain energy to it. That if you go in a half step down or your detuning isn't always there because it's a little more comfortable.
And yeah, the return happened because they wanted to bring back the classic tone, not least thanks to Rick Rubin, their producer on Death Magnetic, who pointed out that they captured the Metallica vibe better in that tuning. And live it's not that necessary because that's Metallica in the flesh, alive and kicking ass. And by the way, do you know what E also stands for? It is... Exter. Exter make premium trackable wallets, which can be described in 3 S's. Small, secure, super fun to click. Store your cards and cash, and be sure you can find it anytime thanks to this cool solar powered tracker. Activation via voice.
Ебло моё в кадре.
Нет.
Ring my wallet.
Or in the app, where you can see the wallet's location and also change the ringtone. And yeah, now it's Christmas sale, so hurry up to take anything on Exter with up to 35% discount with free gift bags, link in description.